Hi guys and welcome to Rathwulven Bushcraft. Thanks a lot for tuning in and please buckle up because it's time for another episode of Bushcraft Bullsh. In this video I want to talk about plant identification apps and why I personally consider them to be absolutely useless, especially in the field of bushcraft where we are dealing with plant identification in regards to edibles and such. Let's assume for a moment that you are completely new to the entire topic of foraging and to botanics in general. Then it only seems convenient to download an app that does all the work of identifying plants and categorizing them for you, right? But there are a lot of issues that come about with apps that are used for plant identification. First and foremost, we need to understand that plant identification apps are actually not identifying any plant at all. They are evaluating digital data. So just take this for an example. You go out and you take a picture of a rose, then this rose itself, the plant itself, is going to be turned into digital data. So basically zeros and ones, which translate as values in terms of hue, saturation, contrast, pixels, and so on. As far as a plant identification app only works with that digital data, it never does work with the actual plant itself, but only with a representation of that very plant. In other words, that means that in the very first moment of our attempt to identify a plant, we're already falsifying the actual interpretation of that plant, right? Next to that, a plant identification app has no senses like we humans do. Take the sense of touch, for example. We can pick a plant, take it in our hands and start feeling the texture of a leaf and the form of a leaf. Does it have serrations? Is it hairy? All these kind of informations play a role in plant identification. The same thing accounts for smelling, for example. What's the actual odor of that plant? Does it smell sweet? Does it smell bitter? Does it smell disgustingly dirty or maybe rotten? All of these things are important for properly identifying plants. The same then also accounts for the sense of taste. We can take a bit of a plant and just put it on our tongue and see whether we have any kind of reaction to this. Picture eating a toxic plant and then getting a rash on the tip of your tongue. An app cannot simulate this feeling and it can also not identify this just by a photograph of a plant, right? Yet another point of criticism is the user confirmation-based nature of such apps. Imagine different types of people registering to the platform of a certain plant identification app, whether that's Plantsnap or Plantnet or however they're called. Then you got different users who are uploading their pictures, right? And then confirm an identification in the database of the respective app. So if a user makes a human mistake and classifies a certain plant A as another plant B, then we are in trouble because the algorithm of the database of this app is going to use this wrong information for further identifications of plants. So also there is the risk of accumulating wrong information and hence falsely interpreting visual information from these photographs that we upload to the app itself. And let's just have a look at a couple of examples, then it will become apparent what I mean by that. Here we do see a picture that has kindly been sent to me by Angela Richards. And let's just have a look at that photograph, right? Which type of plant do we see here? What do you think? So Angela used this photograph and uploaded it to Plantsnap, and Plantsnap told her that this plant is supposed to be wild garlic, Allium ursinum. Can this be true? Well, let's have a look at the actual plant Allium ursinum, okay? So as you can see yourself, this plant looks completely different than the one featured in the first photograph. We have a different growth pattern, we have a different shape of the leaf, and also the colors are a little different on the picture and would be different in real life. Also in real life we would have more information such as the very garlicky smell of wild garlic, which does not exist in the plant shown in the first picture. It is also really interesting that Angela uploaded this photo to a Facebook plant identification group, and guess what happened? The first 3 people commenting underneath her posting were immediately confirming that this must be wild garlic. So as you can see from that example, people make a lot of assumptions. They log it into some kind of computer system in the app, or just confirm this in a Facebook group, in a forum or so, and all of a sudden this becomes the information that is then used over and over again to relate to other attempts of plant identification. I consequently also reached out to Angela and kindly asked her to go and consult an expert on plant identification in her home area, and I will show you why. Please have a look at this picture right here. This plant is a hyacinth. It's part of the family of Muscari, and I assume that it is the Muscari neglectum. I'm not fully sure because I'm not an expert on flowers as such. I'm more orientated towards wild edibles. But if you take a look at the leaves of that plant, those are rather similar to the one in Angela's picture, right? And if you want to, just have a look at another picture right here. Again, note the leaves and the geometry of that plant as such. They do look somewhat similar, right? Even more than the actual wild garlic. And again, I cannot do a proper classification simply based on that one photograph, but the app would actually just use this one photograph and then give you a result and confirming it as whatever type of plant, in that case wild garlic. So there's a false identification happening through the app, and this could potentially be dangerous to Angela or to you, because most members of the family of Muscari or the hyacinths are actually toxic. At least the root bulbs are. They do contain vast amounts of oxalic acid. Oxalic acid can result in liver failure or even worse. And just picture this. You go out, you want to forage for wild garlic, and you want to use the bulbs, the tubers of wild garlic as some replacement for onions, for example. And then you actually go out and you take some of those hyacinths, you cook up those root bulbs, and all of a sudden you intoxicate yourself. What we can learn from this example already is that the app is basically putting your health at risk, right? And if this doesn't convince you, let's have a look at a couple of other examples. Here is a picture that I took earlier this year when I was on a foraging trip, and I'm just going to ask you, what kind of plant do we see on this picture? Can you identify the berries? Can you identify the leaves? What's your guess? If you guessed elder or elderberry, then you're somewhat right, because this definitely is a variety of the elder tree or elder bush, but I need to ask you which one exactly. Can you tell which specific variety this is and whether this is toxic or not? Well, let's have a look at what the app suggests. So the first result of Plantsnap would be Sambucus nigra, or the black elder. Is that actually correct? Well, let's have a look at the actual black elder. We can already deduct from this picture that there's a slight difference to the berries that we saw in the very first picture, because if you look closely, you can see that those berries are hanging down, whereas the berries of the first picture are kind of standing upright right away from this cluster of tiny branches, right? And that's already one very important attribute to make a distinction between the actual edible elderberries and the toxic berries of a certain type of elder that is called danewort. Just for the comparison, yet again, the picture of the danewort, as you can see, those berries are not droopy, they are not hanging down on this relatively heavy cluster as we would have it with the black elder. And this is one of the main characteristics we need to take into consideration when we forage for elderberries. The berries of the danewort are incredibly toxic. They do contain certain agents that are related to cyanide. There are cases of deadly intoxications in regards to consuming danewort berries, right? But when it comes to the black elder, the berries are actually edible, especially after you boiled them and you process them into jam or so. They're very nutritious, they do contain a lot of vitamins, and they are safe to eat. So, the plant identification app failed us yet again. Instead of suggesting that this plant is a toxic one, the plant we're looking at, it actually interpreted it as an edible plant, and you can guess the consequences. If you would just harvest those berries of the danewort, you would be in trouble. Also interesting in relation to this very example is the fact that you could actually smell whether you're dealing with the black elder or whether you're dealing with the danewort, because the black elder has a very pleasant and very sweet smell. The berries of the Danewort, though, smell rather stinky. They got this stench that's kind of rotten in its nature. It's pretty hard to describe, but it's kind of like a very disgusting odor. If you smell this, you are repelled, and an app cannot simulate this experience with the plant, right? So as we see from this example, the app is failing us. It's not capable of identifying a plant like the elder properly. So let us have a look at a final example. Take a look at this picture and tell me what you see. What's your guess? What does this tree or bush look like? What do the berries look like? What would you guess? Well, in my experience, when I go out with my seminar participants, or maybe just with friends who want to learn a bit about plant identification, most of the people I'm asking are answering that this might be some sort of currant, right? Like red currant berries. You probably know these. Let's have a look what the app says about this picture. So the app gives us two different suggestions here, and please just have a look at the Latin names, Viburnum opulus and Ribes rubrum. Those two names are very important right now, because here we do see Ribes rubrum, or the red currant. This berry looks a little different. If we take a close look, the growth pattern is different. It's growing on this long red stem, whereas if we take a look at the other picture, we do not really see a chain of berries, but more kind of like cobs or clusters, right? And what you can also see is that the berries don't have the black end at the bottom of the berry. So the app actually did identify this plant on this picture correctly. Here we are actually dealing with the so-called Guelder rose. And technically the Guelder rose is edible in very small quantities, but just a handful can result in stomach cramps, in diarrhea, in vomiting, and other kind of unpleasant symptoms, right? And I just want to show you this because, yeah, an app can sometimes identify a plant correctly, but at the same time give you a second suggestion which is completely absurd. In this particular case, red currant. And we all know that red currant is perfectly edible. We don't have to fear for any kind of health issues if we eat them. But when it comes to the actual Guelder rose that we do see in this picture right here, we might actually intoxicate ourselves by eating too much of that berry and hence suffer bodily consequences. Okay? So yeah. Also, just for the comparison, let's have a look at both pictures one more time. I would kindly ask you to just have a look at the leaves and the berries as such. You get the time right now to compare this with each other. You could then also draw your own conclusion. Basically, we have an easier time if we're actually in front of the plant, if we would touch it, if we would just analyze it thoroughly with our eyes, our hands, also our nose, so we can get the actual smell of the berries, which is also different in those two plants that are featured. And yeah, all in all, this just proves also in the third example that even if an app has some sort of a lucky guess and identifies one plant correctly, it might nevertheless give some sort of second opinion that's completely off base and might endanger your personal health. So to wrap up the video, a couple of final personal thoughts on plant identification apps. Do I consider them useful? Well, the answer is a clear no. You saw a couple of examples that explain my reasoning behind this, and you also heard about this issue that we have with apps not being precise. They are misleading in some cases, they are endangering you, and they are not analyzing plants as organisms, but just representations of these plants in terms of digital photographies. So when it comes to using plant identification apps as a tool to guide you in your journey to become a forager or kind of a botanist, then they're absolutely worthless. They're just bull. All right. Do I find them fascinating? Yes, I actually do. The technology behind this is still pretty awesome, and I'm not trying to make any kind of company who developed that software look bad, because there's quite some work behind it. There's quite some thoughts put into that. But when it comes to the specific field of foraging, using plant identification apps is complete nonsense. It's bull. Okay. So yeah, I hope you did like this video. If you do, make sure you subscribe to this channel, make sure you give this video a thumbs up, and also if you're interested in foraging, make sure to check out the playlist that I'm going to link in the top right corner of the screen. This takes you to actual foraging footage. I will talk about certain types of techniques. about certain types of principles that will help you get started on your journey towards becoming a forager, right? And yeah, if you like this video, also make sure to share it with people that are interested in this topic, because we need to create a bit of awareness here and get people off the cell phones and out into nature to make them understand how nature actually works, how botany works, how the flora works, right? So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, make sure you leave a comment, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And up until next time, I wish you a pleasant day, have a great time outdoors, and see you in the next video. Take good care. Bye bye.